The main investor then pulled out, and poor little Annie was sent back to the orphanage, bitch. February 22nd, 1983. A show opens and closes on the exact same night. That's right, it is the legendary, the infamous Moose Murders, which has become one of the gold standards for theatrical flops. The playwright was Arthur Bicknell, and his idea, apparently, was this kind of farcical, melodramatic murder mystery inspired by public access television personalities. So the plot involves this wealthy family who are gathering up at the Wild Moose Lodge in the mountains, which is totally packed with hunting trophies, aka taxidermied dead animal bodies everywhere.
Well, what do you think of the place?
Ooh, there's a lot of animals here.
Of course, they become trapped because there's a terrible storm. To pass the time, they decide to play a murder mystery game with the other people that are staying there at the cabin. And that includes a pair of failed entertainers, which rude, as well as an Irish nurse, and inexplicably a man who is wearing Native American war paint, I guess because it was the 80s. But so all of this leads to several actual murders.
There's been a murder!
A man-eating moose trophy, just a little bit of incest, and of course, a mummified paraplegic rising from his wheelchair to kick a moose in the crotch. The director, a guy named John Roach, well, he cast his wife, who was a woman named Lily Robertson, in the lead female role. And was Lily Robertson a seasoned actress? No, she was not. What she was very rich. She had a lot of money. She was the heiress to a Texas oil fortune, and so she financed the entire thing. They did initially have a big name involved. It was the Emmy Award-winning actress Eve Arden, who was famous for her roles in Bewitched and Stage Door.
I don't like to gossip, but that new gal seems to have an awful crush on Shakespeare.
I wouldn't be surprised if they got married.
Shakespeare's dead.
No!
Well, if he's the same one that wrote Hamlet, he is.
Never heard of it.
Well, certainly you must have heard of Hamlet.
Well, I meet so many people.
And most iconically as the principal in Grease and Grease 2.
Perhaps a session of banging erasers after school would put you on the right track.
Yes, ma'am.
But apparently during the previews, Miss Arden was really struggling with the process. And she wasn't picking up her stage directions, she wasn't remembering her lines. And so before the production opened, she departed the project due to artistic differences.
Good, then move.
Yes, ma'am.
And Holland Taylor was brought in to replace her. So even before opening night, there's drama. And then came the previews. For starters, no one was showing up. Attendance was horrible. So horrible, in fact, that producers were actually grabbing people off of the street and begging them to come in and watch the show. Literally just random passersby dragging them in. Previews are meant to test a show out, work out the kinks, get some feedback, which obviously you can't do if you have no audience at all, or an audience that maybe would never see a show like this anyway. So of course they're not going to respond how you're looking for them to. I guess there was another incident during a preview where the curtain just malfunctioned at the end. It would not come down. And for some reason, I think the actors were in a freeze, like until the curtain was supposed to close. And so because it didn't close, they literally just stayed there frozen for several minutes. So after 13 previews, the process led up to one single performance on February 22nd, 1983. And the descriptions of that night's events are really something else. Apparently, when the final curtain closed at the end of the show, there was silence. Like, no applause or response at all. Literally nothing from the audience. One of the cast members said that they thought it might be the first time in Broadway history that a curtain call was met with absolute and total silence from the audience. Can you imagine? Like, you can't even do a pity, like, they must have truly been mentally destroyed by what they had just seen. And then came the reviews. The New York Times compared the audience to survivors of the Titanic disaster. And the New Yorker said that the play would insult the intelligence of an audience consisting entirely of amoebas. Yeah. No offense to amoebas.
Now, why am I in it?
The New York Post refused to describe the show in their review. They said it was so indescribably bad that they would waste no more of anyone's time by going into it, which is ridiculous. Imagine being a producer who gave you tickets worth several $100s, and then that's the response you get. Those producers must have been fuming. And I guess one critic actually appealed straight to the director, saying that he should change his name, maybe even his whole identity, and just start over. And wildly, the man never directed another play on Broadway after that. Drat, the cat. I look like I'm speaking at the Republican National Convention. Drat the cat, that's right, folks, 2 exclamation points. So this show was about a Gilded Age cat girl, who becomes a jewel thief before stealing the heart of the police officer who was previously chasing her, trying to arrest her. And it lasted only 8 days on Broadway. Ira Levin had originally intended to call the show Cat and Mouse until the Nobel Prize-winning author Günter Grass, that's what I look like right now, Gunther Grass. The Nobel Prize-winning author Günter Grass published a book of the same name. Levin apparently always hated the title, Drat the Cat, saying, "I didn't like it then, and I don't like it now. More advice for young playwrights, never use 2 exclamation points in a title. 1 you can get away with, 2, no." I don't know why I said most of that like it was a Real Housewives catchphrase. Advice for young playwrights, never use Advice for young playwrights, never use 2 exclamation points in a title.
Miss Keisha. Oh my God, she dead.
Well, Elton John's brand new musical Tammy Faye opened to overall terrible reviews and low interest from the public, prompting them to announce almost immediately that the show would be closing on December 8th, less than a month after they opened, and after only 24 previews and 29 performances. That's right, Elton John's new, big, expensive Broadway show stumbled and died very quickly. The New York Post called it a disaster of biblical proportions, and they're not wrong. The musical cost $25 million, and last week it was the lowest grossing show on Broadway, up against small shows, plays, you name it. This was the bottom of the Broadway barrel. Looking at the percentages for ticket sales, this poor cast was performing to almost a half-empty theater. When they've just opened, this is supposed to be when they have more momentum than ever. So it's pretty clear why the producers called it quits quite quickly. You really know it's bad when you can't even fill a theater with comped tickets. I think I got some wig in my mouth, and it is sponsored by Batman.
I'm Batman.
Not that one, the one with the nipples. Yes, thank you. The cast of Tammy Faye is led by Katie Brabin. Just assume I'm going to get most names incorrectly. But Katie, Miss Brabin, is in her Broadway debut after she won an Olivier Award for her performance as Tammy Faye in this role when it was open across the pond, when it was open and playing in London. She is joined by Christian Borle as the protagonist's husband, and he was actually a last-minute replacement for the Book of Mormon's Andrew Rannells, who played the role in London and I think had really solid reviews. And he was originally announced by the producers to be performing with the show in New York. But he left the project when they couldn't reach a deal. And he said something along the lines of I don't know why they would announce me before I've signed a contract or something.
Unfortunately, we just got into a situation where we couldn't quite find terms that made everyone happy.
Yeah.
And I guess why normally they don't announce an actor before they do contract. Yeah. I mean, I'm not a professional, but I thought that was odd.
Which happens literally all the time. Producers have a conversation with someone, and then that's leaked to the press, Sydney Sweeney's in talks for, Bananas in Pajamas, the movie. But yes, producers, it's like, even if so-and-so doesn't end up signing the contract, you want that buzz, you want that energy. And those producers were probably like being cracked down on to announce who's going to be in the show. So they knew it would be better to just like go with the assumption that he would buckle down, or give in, there we go, and accept whatever clearly lowball offer they were making for him. And he bounced. You got to respect that, because there are many, many professions that are underpaid, but people would be shocked to know how little a Broadway actor can actually make. In fact, Anthony Ramos, I think on a podcast or something, he was having a conversation and he basically said like, even when he was in Hamilton on Broadway, he was bringing home like maybe $1,000 a week. And to some people, you might be like, oh my God, who can complain about that? Have you seen the rent prices in New York? And have you seen anything else about everything? So one of the most common complaints in the recent round of reviews from the Broadway opening seems to be that Christian Borle seems borreled. By that I mean bored. That did not quite work. But he seems really bored. Like he just doesn't bring anything to it. He doesn't seem like he really wants to be there. And so the production overall is just less exciting. There's way less energy than when it was previously staged in London. And Tammy Faye is not the only time we're going to talk about Sir Elton John today. I don't know, maybe you've already talked about him today. Lestat.
I have lived many lifetimes. I have hidden in the shadows and suffered in the light. I have loved, I have killed, and now I will finally tell my story to the world.
The Mind of Anne Rice, the music of Elton John and Birdie topic, the theatrical event of the year, Lestat, coming to Broadway.
Die young, live forever.
2006's Lestat on Broadway. Tammy Faye, of course, was not Elton John's first bitter taste of Broadway failure. Back in 2006, he worked on the musical adaptation inspired by Anne Rice's The Vampire Chronicles, which is known as the series that has Interview with a Vampire, and I think it's like a multi-show universe. Reviews of this Broadway production were uniformly negative. They were just terrible. The New York Post's verdict was bloody awful. The New York Times wrote, Lestat, the musical sleeping pill. Dare to look upon this show and keep your eyelids from growing heavier and heavier and heavier. But this production only lasted a little bit longer than Tammy Faye. It opened on March 25th, 2006, and it closed on May 28th, 2006, after 33 previews and 39 performances. The Washington Post critic Peter Marks opined that a gay vampire with a 2-octave range can be just as dull as a straight one. Was that homophobia? I can't tell. Put it in the comments if it is. Don't put homophobia in the comments. But you know what I meant. Jumping back to the future to Bring Back Birdie, which was the sequel to the 1960 musical Bye Bye Birdie. Triple B's. They loved their Triple B shows. Do I look like Kurt Cobain? Bring Back Birdie was the sequel to the 1960 musical.
Bye bye Birdie, I'm gonna miss you so. Bye bye Birdie, why did you have to go?
Which was a huge freaking success. It won several Tony Awards and had a really, I think it's a fun movie version. It's one of the like classic movie musicals, and Margaret is in it. And I had a big crush on Bye Bye Birdie and Margaret when I was little. And then I found out she was in the Santa Claus movies.
Your father...
Isn't she like Mrs. Claus's mom or something?
We don't know what's happening at the North Pole. We're completely mystified by it. We think we're in Canada.
We don't know that he's
The big man, the big man.
But it's pretty fun. There's an iconic number, especially for that one called the Telephone Hour. I don't know if you were inserting a clip, but I'm holding just in case.
Well, I heard they got pinned. Yeah. I was hoping they would. Gonna live it at last. He's gone. Going steady for good. Going steady. Going steady. Going steady. Steady for. Going steady.
Like, if you didn't see Bye Bye Birdie 20 years ago, I guess go find a local production or maybe a tour. And that actually reminds me of two other flops. They're kind of like, they're the B cast of this video because they never made it to Broadway. There's two sequels to Annie, not counting there's at least one sequel to the movie. The first one was called Annie 2, Miss Hannigan's Revenge, which sounds so fake, but it really did happen. It came together 6 years after the original production closed, and it starred Oscar winner J.K. Simmons, who I just mentioned in my other video for the red one. No comes full circle. But yes, it starred J.K. Simmons, not as Annie, obviously. But it opened in November 1989 at the Kennedy Center. And the plot, are you ready for this? Sees Daddy Warbucks discover that in order to officially adopt Annie, he must find a wife, which there's just so many problems with that plot line, like implying that not only any man can't, take care of a young child, but also not even that young of a child. But this rich man, like this dude could have a staff member for anything he possibly needs assistance with. She's come from like this horribly abusive, overfilled children's home with this drunk to kill her or something. And at least in the movie version, like they chased her up the super, super high railroad tracks. That scared the shit out of me as a kid. It's just wild that rich ass Daddy Warbucks is not allowed to raise Annie. But so he has to find a wife, which is also a plot line of the Santa Claus 2 movie. Santa's back. What would a super freaking rich bachelor do other than hold a nationwide contest to find a new wife? So he teams up with Annie and Mrs. Christmas. That's the character name, Mrs. Christmas, who is the head of the United Mothers of America, Uma. And I wish it was played by Uma Thurman. I don't know how old she was at the time. We'll put it in the comments if you know how old Uma Thurman was when Annie 2, Miss Hannigan's Revenge came out. But so he teams up with Mrs. Christmas and Annie to decide on the women who enter this contest. And I really wish it could be like a Tila Tequila style situation where he meets like men and women. But Tila Tequila hadn't been invented yet, which probably would have been best if she never was.
I don't feel so good.
Mrs. Hannigan's been in prison since the first Annie, and she escapes prison because she hears about this contest. Like, girl, move on. But she hears about this contest, and she busts out of prison Shawshank style and disguises herself as Charlotte O'Hara. And sneaks in and applies for the contest. And so she kidnaps this young girl who looks like Annie, which, like, I have not seen that many girls with that haircut in my day, but maybe it was different a couple years back. But she literally kidnaps this girl and then, like, somehow kidnaps the real Annie and switches them. But I don't know how that benefits her at all. But anyway, there's like a whole climax. They chase each other around, and I guess there was wrestling throughout the 3-month run of Annie 2 at the Kennedy Center. Every single page of the 145-page script, which that is a long script for like a family show, but every single page was changed. Most of the songs were either like cut or cut down, given to different characters. or just like fully replaced. Millions of dollars were lost in the advertising alone.
At no expense.
Because, of course, they thought they had a surefire hit on their hands. It's Annie 2. Duh.
I mean, I'm not a professional, but I thought that was odd.
And after 36 performances, the show canceled its plan to open in New York. But the investors said, we can't just give up. So they retooled and they hired a new team and they decided to take another swing at it. And Annie Warbucks was born. Annie Warbucks opened off Broadway 4 years after Annie 2, Miss Hannigan's Revenge. They had to let it distance itself a little bit, get that bad taste out of everybody's mouth. You know, it was like I don't know, what's like a failed fast food? Coke. It was like new Coke. But Annie Warbucks had a tryout run in Chicago, and then it took a small tour of like 4 or 5 other cities. Then it had its plan to move to Broadway after an off-Broadway run. But due to a mistake, I don't know who was in charge of this, but the Tony rules apparently dictated that a production to be considered a transfer on Broadway for that season's Tony Awards, it has to open within 30 weeks of its original off-Broadway opening. And by the time they learned this, they were like, oh, we can't do that. So the main investor then pulled out, and poor little Annie was sent back to the orphanage, bitch. But you know what? The sun will come out tomorrow. But that's not guaranteed, though. Like, it might be cloudy. 1955's Pipe Dream, and yes, I am naked underneath this. It was brought to the people of the past, from the musical writing team Rodgers and Hammerstein. They created a string of indelible classics. That sounds like something I would say, right? They include Oklahoma, with the exclamation point, Carousel, South Pacific, The King and I, and Pipe Dream. But that one, Pipe Dream, based on John Steinbeck's novel, Sweet Thursday, turned into financial disaster. Despite the record advanced ticket sales when it opened in November of 1955, everyone just freaking hated it. So between the terrible reviews and the terrible word of mouth, the show closed in June of 1956.
One of America's favorite underdogs has turned into a Broadway surprise. Rocky the Musical
debuted to positive reviews in Hamburg before it transferred to Broadway in 2014. And no expense was spared, as that old man said in Jurassic Park.
Really spectacular. Spared no expense. Spared no expense. Spared no expense. Spared no expense. Spared no expense.
The production ran up $20 million in its costs, including $4.3 million just for the elaborate stage. And it was a pretty amazing setup. It was literally a full-sized boxing ring that like came out of the wall. So I guess for most of the production, it was somewhat bare bones. But then once it was time for the big event, the stadium like came out of the walls and shit flipped or something. Once this full-sized boxing ring took over the stage, it disrupted the first few rows of the audience. So literally the first few rows were moved by ushers to bleachers on the set for the last 20 minutes of the show, because I can't imagine anything a bunch of old rich people would enjoy more than not only having to move, but they have to move in front of everybody and they have to go on stage and sit on an uncomfortable ass bleacher. Like, I wonder why this didn't click with the general public. So the staging did end up winning a Tony Award, but in the end, sluggish sales delivered a knockout blow to Rocky. After just 28 previews and 188 performances, so probably the biggest hit we have on our hands so far. Shall we? Chitty Bang Bang. Oh, Chitty Bang Bang went to Broadway in 2005, but it was based on the older movie, which was based on the book by James Bond author Ian Fleming, if you didn't know that. It was considered a really beloved children's book, and they did fly the car at the end of the show, which I think Back to the Future does now, so maybe people find that less exciting. But at the time, people were like, oh, this is the Chitty Chit. So there was some theatrical magic as that car flew over the first few rows, probably. But sadly, the rest of the show was not good. The New York Times noted that the songs sounded not unlike what you might hear in a sing-along hour in a pre-K class. Jesus. It closed after 34 previews and 285 regular performances. Not as bad as a lot of these other ones. And producer Nicholas Paleologos noted that a substantial portion of the $15 million initial investment will not be recouped on Broadway. So that didn't even include all of the costs they incurred after they were actually up and running. So that's pretty brutal. Well, I couldn't let another one of these videos go by without slandering Sir Elton John. Obviously, he is a true icon and a pioneer, and when you have a billion projects, you're bound to have a handful that maybe don't go as intended. The Devil Wears Prada musical first hit the stage in Chicago in the summer of 2022. And not only do we have Sir Elton John on the music, but we also have Chicago theater royalty with the director Anna D. Shapiro. The original casting included Beth Level as Miranda Priestley. Of course, the role originated by Meryl Streep in the film, and Taylor Iman Jones as Andy Sachs, who was the role played by Anne Hathaway in the movie, which she definitely just premiered a new face recently, and girl, you looking tight and looking good. Not that I have any business commenting on a woman's appearance. I'm going to use this as a learning opportunity. Oh, and Javier Munoz was there too, from Broadway's The Hamilton musical. Anyway, back in Chicago, the run of Devil Wears Prada. I almost said the run of Elton John. Back to Chicago, where Elton John's The Devil Wears Prada, the musical, is running and was announced as a pre-Broadway engagement. But even before the Chicago production closed, Elton John was doing interviews saying, I don't think the show is ready for Broadway. It definitely needs some more work. And at one point, he even said that he believed at least a year's amount of work would be needed to improve the project. And I just gotta say, at some point, you know, if it's opened and it's not great, I get that instinct of like, let's keep going. It's almost there. We could make this better. But also like, maybe move on. Like maybe just let it go. Like why do you want to give another year of your life to something that's not adding much to your legacy? Once again, who am I? The New York Times review of the Chicago run definitely echoed the sentiment that Elton John was saying there in those interviews. They were genuinely puzzled about what the show was trying to be. Was it a sincere story of a young woman finding her feet, or a flashy fashion parade that definitely skimped on the fashions? Like, it's not like these people are walking around. It's not like these people are walking Wow. I don't blame the costume designers at all, because I think that a Hollywood film is, of course, going to have access to real designer clothing and such, whereas the costumes for the stage show need to actually be stage show costumes, and there's only going to be so much of that they can replicate. But it seems to be a general consensus with the feedback that the looks aren't looking. After closing in Chicago, the next act unfolded across the pond, as they would say, in London, when it opened at the Dominion Theatre in late 2024. They replaced the entire team. They have a new cast. So the new director is Jerry Mitchell, who's the director behind Kinky Boots. And the new cast now features the Vanessa Williams as Meryl Streep and Georgie Buckland as Andy. So you must be wondering, did this transatlantic makeover work? Well, the New York Post called it a fender bender compared to the train wreck that they opened in Chicago. So I guess that's a slight improvement. The Post called the music forgettable and derivative. The Times agreed, saying that the costumes were sparkly, but that the production overall lacked va-va-voom. Despite all of this, something on the West End across the pond seems to have clicked. with reports of sold-out audiences and standing ovations, along with an extended run. Although, I did see some speculation online that Vanessa Williams may have been lip-syncing. But perhaps for some, the familiarity and the brand name and the visuals are enough for an enjoyable evening at the theater, even if it's not groundbreaking. So, with slightly more success in London than they had in their Chicago run, will The Devil Wears Prada, the movie, the musical, live on stage, finally make it to Broadway? I guess we'll have to keep waiting to see. I have no idea why I said it like that. Transition. In 1965, we meet Kelly. Kelly was a musical with unusual inspo. It was the story of Steve Brody, who in 1886 claimed to have jumped off the Brooklyn Bridge and survived. Sounds like a bunch of bullshit to me. But if you think this is an unlikely plot for a Broadway musical, audiences agreed. It closed immediately after its opening night. Just imagine, like, good show, everybody. You may want to sit down for this. God, the brutality of that. But it lost $650,000, which in the mid-1960s would be equal to like $7 million today. That's so much money. Like, the people who have this money to throw around sometimes throw it at the stupidest shit. And it's like, you could give me $1 million and you wouldn't even notice that it's gone from your pocketbook or your digital crypto pocket crypto book. It's time for Scary Carrie. Oh God, my dog just... Everybody, this is the love of my life, Miss Zoe. She's cooler than you, and so are we. So 10 years after the movie adaptation of Stephen King's book Carrie, the producers of Broadway shows said, let's try that out on Broadway. So Carrie, along with Buckets of Blood, seemed like a sure hit, a sure thing. But instead, it turned into the wrong kind of horror show, if you follow.
Carrie is a catastrophe.
Because it cost $8 million in the 80s, and it ran for only 16 previews and 5 regular performances before closing. The New York Times said, as the film director Brian De Palma demonstrated in his screen adaptation, Carrie can make for scary, funny, and sexy pulp entertainment, which, they are high school girls, provided the thrills, wit, and post-pubescent sensuality are as sharp as that knife. The musical Carrie fails in all these areas. Well, New York Times, I'm sorry that Broadway didn't get the post-pubescent sensuality right for you. So the show gained kind of a cult following over the years because there's not that many attempts at horror on Broadway, and of course it was such a big bomb. So years later, the score was retooled, the script was retooled, and a new version opened off-Broadway in 2012. And of course this was originally intended to transfer to Broadway after a great run. And though reviews were better this time, and this finally allowed the show to become licensable to theaters and schools across the country, along with a really weird fever dream of a Riverdale episode.
Make a plan, be a man. All this freaking crap just gets in the way.
But it still could not sell enough tickets, and even the revival ended up closing and ending its run early. I bet Carrie was f***ing pissed. Via Galactica, 1972. Originally titled Up with the exclamation mark, that is really a lost art form. But this Broadway musical told the futuristic story of a bunch of social outcasts living on an asteroid in outer space in the year 2972. Among them is the space trash dude who collects garbage in a clamshell-shaped garbage truck ship called Helen of Troy. If you're still with me, can you tell me what I just said because I don't know. The show included some really over-the-top pyrotechnics and special effects, even using trampolines for the actors to show the weightlessness of zero gravity or however much gravity in space or on the asteroid. But none of that seemed to help. The plot was so incomprehensible that at the last minute, the producers decided to put a plot synopsis insert into the programs. So literally imagine sitting down to watch a show and you open it up and there's like a pamphlet with like tiny ass little font expecting you to read multiple paragraphs in expectation that you might know what's going on. You immediately know, like, oh, fuck, we should have gone to Phantom. I mean, most people are disappointed to get any sort of pamphlet in a program because the most common one, besides an advertisement, would be announcing that an understudy was going to be going on, which I will just say that understudies are some of the most talented people working in any Broadway or theater production of any kind. And a lot of understudies end up going on to play leads and become huge names like some of your favorite actors probably. So if you ever speak disrespectfully about understudies, I'm going to get a laser gun and I'm going to laser hair removal you. Understudies are amazing, and what I was talking about, oh yeah, they put that shit in the program. And so this show, Via Galactica, closed after 15 previews and only 7 performances, probably less than a week if they did a 2-show day in there, but it became one of, if not the first Broadway musicale to lose over $1 million. And like back then, that was more dollars than it is now, I can tell you that much. So Via Galactica was the first ever production at what we call now the Gershwin Theater. The production included Raul Julia, most famously remembered by many as Gomez Addams in the 90s Addams Family movies, at least 2 out of the 3, I believe.
Has the planet gone mad?
And Irene Cara. Remember my name. The irony that I don't know for sure exactly how to say her name when that's her biggest claim to fame. She was, of course, the lead in the original Fame, the musical, and she sang the shit out of that catchy title song, also known by the name of Fame. Sing for me. Phantom of the Opera. It is a classic, but surely you were thinking, what the hell happens after those final bows? Well, I can tell you what doesn't happen. Love never dies. Despite the original's massive success, Phantom 2 immediately joined the ranks of Annie 2, Miss Hannigan's Revenge, and Bring Back Birdie in ruining everything that made the first one so beloved. We jump forward 10 years after the events of The Phantom of the Opera Episode 1. The first show takes place in 1881, so naturally, jumping forward 10 years would be 1891, right? No. Shut up. It's 1907 now. The Phantom has ditched the underground of Paris for a new little spot on Coney Island. You know, I would not have pegged the Phantom. I would not have seen the Phantom as like a corn dog queen. Anyway, Mr. Phantom is running a sideshow, and Christine, in these years after Phantom, has become this world-renowned singer. He sends her, I don't know if it's an anonymous letter or just with someone else's name on it, but he says, like, please come to New York. I want to present your premiere as a singer here. Christine and Raoul got married after the Phantom events of the Phantom, and now they have a son named Gustave. So she's not suspicious about this invitation at all. She literally just picks up her family and heads to New York. And that's really when everything hits the fan, both for the characters and the production. But are you ready for the epic twist? We learn that 10 years ago, the Phantom and Christine touched bathing suit areas. And Gustav is the Phantom's child. We are in daytime drama territory. The Phantom and Raoul basically make a bet about Christine, and Gustav disappears, and then because we're in the US now, there are guns involved and people get shot. Weber originally announced that Love Never Dies would open simultaneously in London, New York, and Shanghai in the fall of 2009. We had a lot of confidence going in, Mr. Weber. Only a few months later, this was adjusted so that it would only be opening in London before moving to Broadway in 2010 and opening after that in Shanghai. Very soon after that, they changed their plans, saying that instead of Broadway, it would first be opening in November in Toronto, and then a third production would open in February 2010 in Shanghai. A new opening date for London was now announced for February 20th, 2010, and it would open on Broadway on November 11th, and Shanghai plans were just dropped completely at that point. As February approached, Love Never Dies was actually set to open. And other than the first two previews being canceled, it finally began previews on February 22nd and had an official opening on March 9th. And the critics panned the script, the choreography, the designs, everything. After they got just annihilated by critics and kind of struggled to sell tickets, Andrew Lloyd Webber actually made the unprecedented move of shutting the show down so that they could introduce new choreography, new music, lyrical changes, and after that they had a reopening night with critics invited again. And, feedback was a little bit better. Critics said that some of the lyrics were less clunky, and the updated choreography added some zest. But said zest was still not enough, and the production closed on August 27th, 2011. The plans for the Broadway production were just shut down entirely, along with Toronto, along with Shanghai. Weber himself partially blamed his own illness at the time in an interview with BBC, and now that I think about it, that's really similar to a quote that Elton John recently gave about Devil Wears Prada. Upon closing in London, Weber announced that now productions would open in China and Canada the following year. Neither of those ever happened.
Whose idea was it to make Spider-Man into a musical?
Throw together a popular New York-based superhero franchise, Tony Award-winning Lion King director Julie Taymor, the Broadway version, not the movie version, and music by U2's Bono and The Edge. And what could go wrong? Turns out more than ever, because Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark endured just basically the most iconically awful road to Broadway ever. This disaster piece included many performers that were injured over time because they had these spider people swinging their asses all around a Broadway theater, not set up for this theme park type of shit, this Cirque du Soleil. It wasn't built for that. There was even a near fatality when a stuntman fell 30 feet and shattered his ribs, and this was in front of an audience.
The horrifying accident captured on video by an audience member happened just 7 minutes before the show's end. Stuntman Christopher Tierney, playing Spider-Man, leaned over the edge of a platform and plunged about 30 feet.
You hear a bang, then the audience gets very quiet, and you hear some crying from the lady who was playing Mary Jane, screaming, crying.
A cable attached to Tierney's harness apparently snapped. Producers immediately ended the show, and Tierney was taken by ambulance to a local hospital, where he is in serious condition. He reportedly suffered broken ribs and internal bleeding.
The costs just kept spiraling out of control beyond $75 million, the most expensive Broadway production of all time. And because they just couldn't get it right, they were constantly doing previews where the show would be halted for hours while they had to untangle a Spider-Man from the sky or some shit. Or the tech just wasn't going right. And so it ran in previews for a record 182 performances. As you will note, that's much longer than most of the runs, if not all of the runs that we've talked about in this video. The runs. 182 previews, and then Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark continued running for 3 years. But because it was so over the top, so overbloated and expensive, and I'm sure the insurance to have these spider people swinging around was just astronomical, the show never, ever, ever approached making a profit, and eventually it had to close. And that is full circle on J. Jonah Jameson, Spider-Man. Anyway, I'm going to feed my dog, and I appreciate you being here. If you are, I might be talking to no one, but what else is new? If you liked this, or, you know, have anything else nice and positive to say, throw that shit in the comments, and don't forget to share and subscribe. Bye. I want to write a historical fiction comedy called The Phantom of the Oprah. That's basically the plot of Phantom, but it takes place backstage, but it takes place backstage of the Oprah Winfrey show while it was taping in the 90s. And, you know, Oprah would, of course, fill in the Christine role. I think that would be good. Do